Hi, this is Father Bill W. here in Austin, Texas, and want to welcome you back to our podcast. I'm going to keep the announcements kind of short. We're in the middle of a three-part series here, so I don't think introductions are really necessary. If you haven't listened to the first part, I'd encourage you to go back and start with that. We're going through the 12 steps and doing so from an historical perspective, and my hope in this series is to make the steps more approachable, more easy to understand, looking at them from an historical perspective. The announcements simply are that we're going to be doing a workshop on two-way prayer. Invite you to spread the word on that. That'll be on December the 11th from 10 to 12:30 Central Time. Please write me, and I'll be happy to send you a flyer on that and encourage you to bring some friends. Send the flyer around, help spread the word. You can also go to our website, TwoWayPrayer, TWO, and under events, it will link you to the flyer there. And sign up for the newsletter if you have not done that already. So we're going to jump right in. The first episode was on connecting to God, kind of coming out of self and realigning ourselves with access to this power that can do for us what we can't do for ourselves. So that's the first three steps are connection. Second set of steps, I would call those correction. And these are removing the blocks, the obstacles that exist between me and God, me and other people. And then the third in the series will be on the last three steps. And that'll also be the subject of the upcoming workshop on two-way prayer, but basically direction. So hope this information is helpful. And if it is, again, spread the word. We want to do all we can to get some of this information out there to the 12-step community. So here we go. So this is the correction phase. And what this has to do with is, I'm seeking union. The spiritual experience, those who've had a spiritual experience, there's a union. There's a breaking down of the barriers, of the blockages that are separating self from God, self from others. Even, this is a little more complicated, even self from true self. There's even a blockage that's happening there. So the correction phase is all about removing the blockages. Now, Frank Bookman, who was the founder of the Oxford Group, said a lovely phrase I like. He said, "I work with constipated Christians." And his job was to remove the blockages, get the crap out of the way, to be blunt, all right? To be blunt. And that's what this next phase is going to be about. So I think it's really helpful if we can look at it as sort of a package so that you understand it. And once again, don't get lost in the step. All right? Does that make sense? So we're going to do another package deal. I've connected. Now the course becomes, okay, you've connected. Now let us correct what is out of whack. You see? Makes sense? We're going to correct it. So I make a moral inventory. What's out of whack? How was it done before the big book? Again, so we can learn from where it was they were heading. So this is again from Sam Shoemaker. It would be very good if you took a piece of yellow paper, scrap paper, and wrote down the sins you feel guilty of. One of the simplest and best rules for self-examination that I know of is to use the four standards, which Dr. Robert E. Spears said represented the summary of the Sermon on the Mount: absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. Review your life in their light. Put down everything that doesn't measure up. Be ruthlessly, realistically honest. So before the big book, before the inventory thing that is presented there, how did they do their inventory? Because they did it. Well, how they did it was they took a piece of paper, and on one page they put honesty, on another purity, selfishness, love, unselfishness, and love. And where did I fall short? And ask for God's guidance to show you where they are. Be ruthless, put down everything. Now, this is important because I've heard hundreds and hundreds as a priest, hundreds and hundreds of fifth steps, and too often people turn it into an analysis. They analyze themselves. That's not helpful. Well, it may be helpful. It's certainly not helpful to listen to it, I'll tell you that. What's helpful to listen to is when a man or a woman comes clean with all of the crap that is burdening them down and drowning them in guilt and shame and remorse and all of that. That's the stuff. And if that doesn't come out in your fourth and fifth step, I don't think you've done it. All right. So step 4 in a nutshell, it's not an analysis. All right. But it's putting down on paper the sins, the secrets, and the shames that I want to hide. And everybody's got them. If you knew this about me, you would hate me, just like I hate me. You see, I got to let you into my world. I got to drop the mask. You see? Now, the Oxford group defines sin as anything that separates you from God, anything that separates you from others, anything that separates you from your true self. All right? Wilson didn't want to use the word sin, so it's shortcomings and defects of character. But in the Oxford group, they called it sin. And Frank Bookman, when he called it sin, when he talked about sin, he would write it this way. This was very helpful for me when I started studying. He would write sin with a little s, and then the next letter in the word sin is a great big I. And then the next letter is a little n. And if you think about sin in that way, that's what they're talking about. How this big I, selfishness, self-centeredness, how this gets in the way of my relationships with God, my relationships with you, my relationships with my true self. That's the stuff I got to get to. Ask God to show you what needs to be seen and written down. Ask yourself, are you consciously avoiding putting down something? To me, that's the question. Did I do a fourth step right? Well, are you holding back anything that you don't want to talk about? That you don't want to share with somebody? That's the place to do it. And again, this was meant to be a one-time experience. Continuance comes later. All right. You're going to keep looking at ourselves. More will be revealed. But the question at the end of 4 is, am I getting honest and spilling my guts with someone? That's it. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. All right. So you can see I'm eating away as I do this. I'm eating away at the barriers that separate me from God, me from others, me from true self. That's why it's critical that this step be done with all three, because each plays a part. See, they called it confession before we had step 5. A couple of quotes here. One from Shoemaker. The thing to do next is to face your sins. Where are you cutting corners? I found it necessary to go to someone I could trust and make a clean breast of my sins. Many quite respectable people have hidden things in their past and their present that need to come out in confidence to someone. The only release and hope for many bound and imprisoned and defeated people lies in frank sharing. It is not costly to share our problems or even our comfortable sins, but it is costly to share the worst things we ever did, the deepest sin of our life, the besetting temptation that dogs us. I think he's honing in there on exactly what I'm saying. It isn't that you've done a brilliant analysis of your psychic life. It's that you've confessed your sins one to another, you know? And that's when we really pay the price of admission to our 12-step fellowship. They say, there is no cost for this. Oh, nonsense. There's a huge cost. And that's where it is. A huge chunk of it is there. Did you do it? Did you do it? Dr. Bob's wife, Ann, again, encouraged people to go naked to God, to hide nothing. That's the thing, that's the thing. Not did you get your columns right? Did you get to the stuff that you didn't want to share? That's my experience. So step 5 in a nutshell. Where did this confession, in quotes, come from? Well, the Oxford group people based it on the letter of James. Confess your sins one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. So much of the AA program comes from the letter of James, the epistle of James, that they almost called AA the James Club when they were searching for a name. So read that. I can send it to you if you'll send me an email. I'll send you the little booklet I did with some of the key scriptures that they used. What did it include? Sharing with one other human being the things you swore you'd take with you to the grave. And again, it was intended as a one-time event, not to be gone back over and over and over again. Now, I want to address this. That's why we have step 10. Continue to take personal inventory. Are you going to be taking inventory? Yeah, you can be doing that for the rest of your life. Okay. And are you going to be taking it to another person to share it? Yeah, you're going to be doing that. All right. You're going to be taking it to God? Yeah, you're going to be doing that. But get through your steps, so that you can get on to living a surrendered and guided life and not repeatedly going back and getting baptized, going back and getting married. Get through it and then live it out. Live it out for the rest of your life. And is that going to include inventory? Absolutely. But I think there's great advantage to working those 3 steps in a really deep manner and not 12 steps in a half-assed manner. The correction phase continues. Steps 6 and 7. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, all the blockages, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. All right. So this is really taking you into the 4 absolutes: the honesty, the purity, the unselfishness, and the love. And this was really the heart and soul of the pre-Big Book program. All right. It all centered around these: absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, absolute love. I'm going to break them down. Dr. Bob said, thank God. Bob didn't say much, but he did say a few things, and thank God they got him down. All right. Because otherwise we're getting everything from Bill, and Bob had a lot to say about this thing too. The 4 absolutes. This is from his last AA talk, big talk. The 4 absolutes, as we called them, were the only yardsticks we had in the early days before the steps. I think the absolutes still hold good and can be extremely helpful. I have found at times that a question arises and I want to do the right thing, but the answer is not obvious. Almost always, if I measure my decision carefully by the yardsticks of absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute purity, absolute love, and it checks up pretty well with those 4, then my answer can't be very far out of the way. Now, Bill said something that's very helpful to me. He said in a letter that he put the absolute, he was asked, where did you put the absolutes? Since they were so central to the pre 12-step program, where'd you put them in your steps? He said, I put them in steps 6 and 7. Wow. That gave me a whole new understanding of what steps 6 and 7 are about. They are the shortest steps in the big book. It's 2 paragraphs. He doesn't go into them in great depths. And the reason he didn't go into them, I think, in great depths was because he didn't want to have the AA program associated with the Oxford Group program. All right. And if he talked about the 4 absolutes in the minds of the general public, it would be, that's Oxford Group. And he wanted to separate it out from the Oxford Group. Go to a meeting in Cleveland or Akron area, you're likely to see the 4 absolutes up on the wall, just like in other places you'll see One Day at a Time or Think, or whatever it might be. You will see the 4 absolutes. And the Cleveland AA office still publishes a pamphlet on the absolutes. So where Dr. Bob was most influential, you still see the absolutes having sway. I think in the handouts, I'm given handouts from the Two-Way Prayer workshop where I go into greater depths on some of these issues, and the 4 absolutes is one of them where I do go into greater depths. But in the handouts that Joel is putting in the chat, there is a description, a deeper description of the 4 absolutes, how they relate to the different steps. So here's a nice breakdown, though, that I use a lot, and this came from, again, Tom Powers, AA pioneer, and so he and his group kind of broke it down. Absolute honesty, no lying, no cheating, no stealing. In a word, in all your affairs, simply and absolutely no falsehood. Rigorous honesty, absolute purity. And it's not just sex, but it is sex. There's a hell of a lot of 13 stepping going on out there in 12-step clubs and things, and you better be aware of that. All right. Absolute purity, purity of mind, purity of body, purity of the emotions, purity of heart, sexual purity. Again, it's back to where am I putting up blockages? What parts of my life am I saying to God, you stay the hell out of here. This is my business. This is my business. I mean, we get sober and okay, haven't had a drink in X number of years or a drug in X number of years or whatever it might be. How you doing in the other areas of your life? How are you doing in these other areas, in your emotional area? That's what Michael was talking about when he shared. Yeah, he hadn't had a drink, but the transformation had not really happened to the depth that it needs to happen. Absolute unselfishness, seeking what is right and true ahead of what I want in every situation. So there you are, once again, back to that selfishness, that sense of self, entitlement, the ego. The ego must be shrunk. It can't be eliminated, but it must be shrunk down to what? To right size. You need an ego in the world. You have to have an ego. Sometimes I hear 12-step people say, I got to get rid of my ego. Well, good luck. If you get rid of your ego, you're psychotic and you're headed towards a mental institution. All right? Because everything from the unconscious is just going to come up, unfiltered. Well, some weird stuff down there. Very weird stuff. And you need an ego to kind of sort it out, So you have to have an ego, but is it the right sized ego? See, it's the right sized ego. You see, you go to a psychiatrist, and what do you call a psychiatrist? What's the slang word for a psychiatrist? A shrink. Well, what the hell is he supposed to shrink? He's supposed to shrink your ego. You're supposed to shrink your ego down to its right size. Harry Tiebout wrote a number of articles on this. He was Bill Wilson's psychiatrist, and the first shrink to really take AA seriously. So his stuff is well worth reading. Ego Factors in Surrender is probably his best article. Absolute love, loving God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength, loving your neighbor as yourself. One of the best meetings I ever attended was where they were talking about what really lies at the heart of our addictions. And people came up with all sorts of answers. And a woman answered from the back, raised her hand, and said, I think I have a love disorder. And I was in my first year of sobriety, and I was kind of blown away because I knew she nailed it. She nailed it. I have a love disorder. You want to understand addiction at its depth. You're looking at a love disorder. You're looking at a blockage that is keeping you from loving and from being loved. And I take a substitute for that in some other form that promises to deliver but will not, cannot. You see? So that's why of those four absolutes, the love is by far, I think, the most important. And if there were a fifth absolute, I would add courage. Because it's going to take courage to really begin living these out. Okay. I always get a kick out of this. Bob liked the absolute so well that he decided to get buried with them. So if you look over there next to his tomb, he and Annie are there. He's got honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. So people will say they're not a part of the program, and that's true. It's true. Wilson pushed them out, but Bob believed in them, and I think they are the undergirdings of almost all of the steps. So taking a look at them, understanding them, trying to practice 4 rather than 50 virtues, I have found to be helpful, and I think Bob did too. So 6 and 7 in a nutshell, you aim for perfection, which is the absolutes, and you learn to settle for progress because you ain't gonna make it. And what does that bring about? It brings about greater humility. It brings about greater humility. But aim for perfection. Don't aim for just progress. I hear that expression all the time. Well, I'm shooting for progress, not for perfection. That's dangerous. The pioneers would say, no, shoot for perfection. Settle for progress. Shoot for perfection. If example, a pilot flying his airplane, he heads towards what? Due north. That's perfection. Due north. And then he veers left and right, but he always comes back to perfection, the perfection of due north. You see, understanding that he's going to fall short. But if you just shoot for progress, in the mind of a calculating, dishonest addict, look out. God is the standard. I aim towards God. I aim towards that. Completely giving ourselves to this simple program. I mean, the book always goes back and forth between this standard of perfection and this standard of, well, now be careful. And I think both need to be there. They both need to be there. All right? Because if you become a perfectionist, that's destructive as hell. But if you become a God seeker, that's healthy. That's healthy. And God doesn't yell at us for coming up short. Actually, it's in the coming up short that I'm going to learn something. Jung said something very helpful. He said, after age 35, success has nothing to teach a man. That's interesting. after age 35. So it's like in the first half of life, you build up, but then in the second half of life, you let go, and it's in the letting go. It's in the failures of life, the stumbling blocks of life, that the lessons are really learned, not in the successes. Oh, yay, yay, me. It can be ego inflating once again. All right. 8 and 9. Made a list of all persons we had harmed, came willing to make amends to them all, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I don't have much to add here. And I'm not going to just throw stuff up here for the sake of doing so. So I think we've got a pretty good handle on the making of amends. And unlike the Oxford group people, many of the amends that we need to make are a hell of a lot more serious than some of the amends that they needed to make. So I think we could probably teach them a thing or two here in the process. But there is one thing that I think is important that I take away from the study of the history, and that is that the actions we're taking, the amends that we're making, are not only for our benefit. In the Oxford group, they looked at the effect an amend could have on another. Honesty begets honesty. That in going to another person and opening your heart and sharing with them the damage that you have done and taking responsibility for it can and often will have an effect on the person who is hearing it that could well encourage them to do the same. So that honesty begets honesty. And I hear, just be mindful of that. I think it's helpful because I hear sometimes in 12-step, well, if they don't like my amend, screw them. This is about me. I got to do it. There's that attitude again. It's not just about me. Yes, I have to do it. But if I do it rightly, it can change other people who have an amend to make. Maybe towards me. Yes, I own my part of it, and I take full responsibility for that. But if there is a broken relationship, it's an opportunity for them to perhaps do the exact same thing and make an amend to me. So this relationship thing, I think it's an important thing that I kind of took away from the stuff. So not a lot that I can add on 8 and 9. So questions, we'll pause for a little bit here and take some questions. I'm sure I stirred up a little controversy there. I hope so.
We got a couple of questions. I have here, someone asked, how do you see the 4 absolutes that are in steps 6 and 7, and can you expand on what you mean?
Okay, good question. So 6 and 7 is I have defects of character, I have shortcomings, I have sins, I have blockages. All right. I need to be aware of them, and I need to watch for them. And I'm very conscious of them after coming out of the 5th step, and so the instructions are to go deeper, to go off by yourself, spend an hour with the book, look at what's going on, and give these to God. Sometimes there was a bit of a second surrender, and I think this is really important for alcoholics and addicts. Okay, I'm going to surrender my alcoholism, my life, my stuff to God. Yeah, but after you've been around for a little while, you start to see, hey, there's more stuff in there. It's not just the drinking, it's not just the drugging. It's the dishonesty. So to keep an eye on those things, I think the 4 absolutes have been in my life extremely helpful as a lens that I watch myself. Was I dishonest? Was I selfish? Was I unloving? Was I impure? Watch those. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. It's a lot. And it's helpful it's helpful as a lens through which I watch my life, my outer life, and my inner life. You see what's going on outside, what's going on inside. And again, they came from the life of Jesus. So when they looked at Jesus, that was Robert Spear's book. And what the Oxford group people did was they took things. If they saw it out there and they found it effective, they took it. And this was one of the things that they took was, well, if we could just give people 4 things to kind of keep an eye on their emotional and moral life and relationship with God, it'd be really helpful. So there's an element of simplicity to it, and yet great depth. Great depth. Hope that helps.
And along the same thread of thought, someone asked that in Back to the Basic, Wally teaches Oxford group and that Dr. Bob used assets and liability checklist on 4th step inventory. Is that the same as the 4th step that the Oxford group would have used?
You know, I don't know the answer to that, honestly. My interest, Wally's interest, is after the big book came out, and then people started coming in great numbers. How did they get people into the program? My interest is much more before the big book was even published. So whether later on in the 40s and they integrated some of that stuff, I don't know. And I would lean more towards probably Wally having researched that sort of stuff than myself, who's just not terribly interested in it. Yeah.
And then I don't know, Suzanne has any that she wants to jump in.
Suzanne, you got anything?
I've got one along the same lines, actually. It says, where did Bill get the 4th step from the big book, 4 columns?
Well, whoever can answer that question, please get in touch with me. There are some indications it may have come from this, may have come from that, but it was not Oxford group. It was not Oxford group. So I don't know. Love to get the right answer to that. And it's helpful. I mean, what was Oxford group for sure was you look at your part in this. That was absolutely Oxford group. Yeah, this happened and that happened. Now, what was your role in that? You must take responsibility for that. Absolutely, Oxford group. But the putting it into columns, not.
I've got one more.
Yeah.
It says, any real life antidote for ego being right-sized through the 12 steps and getting the person out of the subconscious. What is the opposite of calculating and dishonest addict?
Obedient, surrendered, aligned. I don't like the word surrender. I've done a fair amount of work with trauma survivors, and the word surrender tends to bring up paralyzing fear in some ways. I mean, I had physical abuse as a kid, so surrender is not my strong point, but alignment with God, alignment with God's will, alignment with the beauty and the love and that which is in the world and is accessible. That's what I have to get to. Did that answer it? Because I got a little lost there myself, Suzanne. Give me the question one more time just to make sure I touched it.
Getting it now. Any real life antidote for ego being right-sized through the 12 steps and getting the person out of the subconscious.
Yeah, that's well, wait a minute. Okay, thank you. That's what the steps are there to do, to make an initial change and a powerful one in 1 through 9. And then in 10, 11, and 12, to go deep, to meet your ego daily, to see it manifesting itself in all sorts of forms, and to find and follow God's will in all sorts of situations, in my life, in my thought life, in my inner life, in my work life, you know. So you will meet ego. Remember the movie, it's showing my age here, but the Terminator, you know, and the Terminator would, he'd get destroyed. They'd shoot a gun or a cannon at him, and he'd fall into 1,000 different pieces. And then, like Mercury, those pieces would come back together. Well, that's the most beautiful description of the ego I've seen. You see, it will continue to reassert itself. It will continue to take control of my life, you know? And so when we get to the next phase, the watchfulness of how it's doing that is absolutely critical. Okay, so that's a great question. Yeah, an important question. Anything else? That's that it? We move on?
That's
Just
it
a
for me.
I
You got
got
a quick one, Joel?
So two things. One of them is a more logistical one. Do we? So a lot of people have been asking if they're going to be able to receive a recording of
Yes.
Okay, a recording. The slides.
Yeah. Mike is recording this.
Okay.
I think it's just the audio.
Okay.
It will go on recovery tapers. There's a section called Two-Way Prayer. And when he finishes his box of Oreos, he will, if he's not on such a sugar high that we lose him for a while, he's going to get it posted up there in 2 or 3 days. And just go by the date, okay?
Okay.
And I can send a copy of the PowerPoint if people will write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com, okay? So you can have the whole thing. So that concludes the second episode on the correction phase, the middle part of the program, steps 4 through 9. Just a quick announcement. Mentioned a couple of articles and things during the episode, and wanted to make sure you know how to get a hold of those. Mentioned the booklet that I put together on the scriptures, the pieces of scripture that the early AAs and the people in the Oxford group found really helpful. If you'll send me a note, I'll be happy to send that along to you in electronic form. Also, might be helpful to get the handouts. We gave those out on the workshop. They're actually the handouts for the two-way prayer workshop, but they contain a lot of information that would be helpful in understanding the 12 steps themselves. So again, write me. Happy to send that to you. I'll put a link in there on the Harry Tebow article, mentioned that ego factors and surrender. Um, really, really important article for anybody in recovery to understand how that ego works. And then finally, if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint that we used for the workshop, I'm happy to send that along to you as well. So just write me. Yeah, I can get in touch at Two-Way Prayer, TWO, Two-Way Prayer at gmail.com. Hope the information was helpful, and hope to see you at some upcoming workshops. God bless and keep coming back.